I'm sitting here playing Pokemon Gold on my computer because there's like no other way to play it short of taking it and my ancient Game Boy Color and getting them repaired, assuming that I can find someone who can fix an old Game Boy and replace the internal battery in the game cartridge. And it feels like I'm being haunted. If I take a moment, if I sit around and soak in the music, these old notes etched into my brain like formative memories, I can feel my past a little. I played this game in bed, hiding it from my parents, or, at least trying to. I played it in the long car rides from redacted Texas to redacted Illinois. I played it in the school bathrooms when I could sneak off, or on the bus. I was obsessed. It didn't help things that my brother had a rare glitch on his copy of Silver that was called the Day Zero glitch. Apparently, he couldn't trade Pokemon anymore, but it gave him every single Pokemon not in the game natively, including trade evolutions and infinite Master Balls, and oh, that was a lie. Oh, he just used a Game Shark or something. There's a friction to old Pokemon that can feel so grating these days. As an adult with no free time for anything, pushed around by work and my body's decomposition, I have so many worries and stressors and anxieties that sitting down explicitly to play Pokemon feels foreign, like I'm disrespecting my childhood or something. But that's not just me, right? Isn't that why Pokemon Legends Arceus looks and feels like this? Like, look at this game. It's huge. A bold take on the series that kind of feeds into the imaginations of our youth. What if Pokemon could attack you directly? What if you could, dodge and run around and they'd be, out there, that'd go so hard. And it kind of does, Legends Arceus is great. Well, actually, it's been terrifying. Look at this game. I have that phobia that makes me afraid of things that are too big, creeping out of places like fog or the dark, oceans, space. It's the reason why I can't play Outer Wilds. It's good, Legends Arceus. It's Breath of the Wild, but with Pokemon. It was generally well received on release, and it takes itself aesthetically pretty seriously as a console title, and yet it feels kind of empty. I feel a little empty playing it, and I genuinely have been struggling to piece together why. I just got finished telling you that I like it after all. I think that a lot of people in the fandom have been struggling with this too. Maybe not specifically this with Legends Arceus, but with a kind of pervasive dissatisfaction with this series, and untangling that is complicated. And in meeting with that kind of friction, some fans maybe divert to easier things to gripe about. People complain about the production values, the lack of polish going into some of the more recent titles, the bugs, the reused animation cycles, Dexit, which as a personal aside, is a really silly thing to get upset over. I'm sorry for everyone genuinely aggrieved over it, but it was inevitable that they would have to start making games that don't have the full list of Pokemon logged in them. Their business model rests on making 100 new Pokemon every generation in perpetuity. This was just gonna happen. I'm getting off topic. Look, this emptiness, right? It's not the kind of emptiness I'm used to. I've played shallow iterations of a series I've liked. I've played deeply frustrating titles. I've played bad sequels and remakes, but there's a distinct kind of melancholy imbued in this game that reaches beyond it. Something about the effect of playing and beating it makes me revisit it with the feeling that this game exists in the wrong world, the wrong social environment, the wrong time. It's good, but it being good feels almost meaningless. Oh god, I'm still depressed. Okay, look, that's fine. Look, let's just take our time and pick this apart step by step. So, storytelling in Pokemon is kind of hard to talk about. There are some fans that take it pretty seriously, and I gotta say, it's not that deep. That's not even me being dismissive or mean. These are games for younger audiences. Look, from the very beginning, the series has always felt safe. And I mean that pretty literally. Violence in Pokemon is almost exclusively the domain of the Pokemon themselves. That's not to say that bad things don't occasionally happen to humans in the series, but the overwhelming majority of the violence that you'll experience directly in the game rests on the shoulders of the Pokemon. Pokemon battles are magical combat simulations where defeated Pokemon will faint and can be restored easily, and more extreme kinds of violence on Pokemon is situational and largely off-screen. None of these games depict a Slowpoke getting its tail cut off. I'm laboring over this point too much because, yes, violence, as nebulous a concept as it can be, does happen to human characters. But I think most of you can intuit that, like, raw, baseline, physical striking or harming is pretty much the domain of Pokemon to be inflicted upon other Pokemon, exemplified by the common NPC dialogue in most mainline series games that point out that you're not safe in the tall grass without Pokemon of your own. Notably, Arceus transgresses on that boundary. What was once a matter of your team versus an enemy team or the wilderness has shifted, and now Pokemon are attacking you directly. Uh-oh. Maybe that's part of what scares me so much about it, like the fact that when spotted by aggressive Pokemon in the wild, they will target you specifically and attack until you either escape or fight back with a Pokemon of your own, kind of makes it all feel way more intense an experience. It's good immersion. The boss fights against the noble Pokemon kind of key into this as well, since it's you versus them. You don't actually ever have to send out your own Pokemon if you're skilled enough. You know, the effect of it blends pretty nicely with the setup of the story. You were dropped off the coast of a village of people that don't yet really get how to coexist with Pokemon or even catch them yet, so the place is fortified to keep the villagers safe. You come in with an incredible knack for catching Pokemon, and you're off to the races. Like, this is kind of the problem I run into when talking about story in Pokemon games. By and large, each game in the series kind of puts the plot aside into discrete little chunks because the games are primarily the premises for exploration. You know, you actually don't want to have a highly narratively dense, complex Pokemon story because the game's construction is built to invite you, the player, to engage with the premise directly. You know, go and explore the world, catch Pokemon, fill out your decks, gain badges, become the champion. That these stories also can have fun, smaller plot lines, character arcs, and so on is fine, but it's not the central thrust of the game. Even as recently as Scarlet and Violet, which boasts like 3 major storylines that intertwine, opens with a clear objective, that you're out here to explore Paldea and have a good time doing it. And like, for what it's worth, Arceus genuinely struggles with this, and to its credit, it's not even particularly bad that it does. It's interesting, because the game is chopped up by plot beats instead of mechanical goalposts like gym badges. It does kind of make it hard to keep up with the sheer task of exploring. If you're me, I'm sorry, I'm just genuinely not good at open world games. I see a task, I complete it, beep boop, meow meow. If there's a game that runs in a shocking parallel to this one in the series, it's Mystery Dungeon. Listen, both are isekais, both have strange occurrences misshaping the natural state of the world, causing a sudden spike of wild, dangerous Pokemon. The conflict reaches a point where you're falsely accused as the culprit behind it all and are exiled from your new home, prompting you to go on a journey where mythical Pokemon help you to come to realize the truth, allowing you to make a triumphant return where you rally your companions and come together to confront the big final issue, specifically in both cases a legendary Pokemon that's gone off the deep end. There is one pretty specific divergence, though. These stories are broadly kind of heroes' journeys, ordinary people who cross the threshold and are set on a quest, etc. I'm not going to summarize Joseph Campbell right now. Look it up. It's fucking everywhere. But notably, the hero in Mystery Dungeon refuses to return home. At the end of the game, when the conflict is revealed to such an extent that it becomes clear that in solving it, it will pull you back into your own world, leaving everyone behind, you make a pure and honest wish to stay, and that wish is granted. It's a hero's journey where the hero never returns again. It's kind of a bold move for Pokemon. Like, yes, this stuff happens in other stories, sure, but Pokemon has never been a visionary of narrative, so to just cop to its own sentimentality kind of gives up the game, doesn't it? I'm not even saying it's bad. It just reveals that Pokemon as a series cares about a kind of childish wish fulfillment. It's a power fantasy for kids, you know, a world that you come into skilled and talented enough that you can rise to the top of this competitive environment that typically only has stakes within its own context. The world is usually generous and kind and socialized. You don't really see systemic issues in Pokemon. You know, the villains are either petty, misunderstood, or so abstract and grandiose that it doesn't feel like any kind of real issue. Wanting to, wait, what did Team Galactic want to do? Hold on. Oh, right. He wants to destroy the universe and recreate it. I think that makes my point clear. Yeah? Anyway, interestingly enough, the choice to stay in the new world in Legends Arceus never even comes up. It's mentioned briefly that there's got to be a way to get you home, like once, but then it just isn't ever addressed again. You know, nothing about the conflict takes you home. You just live here. It's maybe the one really odd beat in the game for me because it feels like an elephant in the room. You know, you did arrive here as the rift did, and your fixing of that rift has left you here, and everyone's just kind of not talking about it. You know, you're part of the team now. You've secured this position. It's just kind of easy now. It's an odd beat, but I still kind of like it. Like, there's a lot of, like, understated emotional ambiguity in this weird game. You face unreal ordeals for a child to face in a world where physical danger is never more present. You know, the leader of Team Galactic's paranoia is enough to kick you out of the village on a whim. And yes, some of your friends from the Diamond and Pearl clan, you know, your rival, the professor, all care about you enough to help how they can. But this world has proven to have a kind of pervasive hostility to it that you can never really resolve. And yet, it is a world that you are so qualified to participate in that here you are, right? Able to catch both Dialga and Palkia and a variety of other legendaries once you venture into the post-game, you know, even Arceus itself. There's a recontextualization of this simple power fantasy happening in this game that has almost no direct textual support. It's all vibes and meta-narrative, and that's kind of striking for Pokemon, isn't it? I don't really talk too often about meta-narrative because it's weird, mostly, right? But I think that Pokemon's meta-narrative has always been pretty strong, but it's been one with a pretty limited scope. Like, you get to write the story of how the battles go because the textual narrative weight of them are all resting on the battles happening and their respective outcomes, and in most cases only the victories, as losing is a game over. But in Arceus, it leaks out a little. Like, maybe I'm overthinking it, fine, but my experience is stuck on this feeling that the world will never really stop being kind of dangerous to my anachronistic little MC. I don't know. I think that's neat. So, let's step back from my overthinking. The thing is, beyond the meta-narrative, beyond how scarred I get from the alpha Pokemon, I cannot overstate this. I cannot play this game alone at night. It's too scary. Don't look at me like that. I find the experience of Legends Arceus bizarrely melancholic. It's not a particularly morose game. It has an excellent village theme song that does feel pretty nostalgic and a little sad. And the game's kind of passive ignoring of the lingering feeling that you're just never going to go back home. Well, that definitely contributes. But in the grand scheme, you know, this feeling, this ambiguity goes outside of the boundaries and concerns of the game itself. This isn't a worry about story, character, themes, mechanics, but something bigger. And, like, the obvious thing here is that Pokemon doesn't really have time to be anything but a perpetual motion machine, right? Game Freak has been pushing a year turnover on major releases for a while, which, you know, by the way, this game was released in the same year as Scarlet and Violet. Like, they didn't even give it a full year between major releases, and it's kind of starting to show. Like, I know I opened by downplaying the found outrage of the series, but, like, the crunch and demand to release these products this quickly does get pretty apparent. And while there's a more robust conversation about the game industry's obsession with mistreating employees, and, like, for the record, it sucks, and brutalizing workers to make poor quality games seems like it's such an obvious lose-lose. More selfishly, and more within the boundaries of this obnoxious video, this quick turnover makes these games feel ephemeral. A new Pokemon game comes out, and it's this event. You know, streamers pick it up, they go mad. I have some good friends who are insane at this, streaming these games in a few weeks until they fill up the Pokedex, beat every challenge, and start shiny hunting. If they haven't, like, straight up gotten shinies of every Pokemon they can, it's impressive. At its best, Pokemon fans are incredibly skilled at these games, going so far as to make unreal challenges, ranging from the humble Nuzlocke to the trendy Kaizo Ironmon to the bespoke Seer run where he beat the game without using anything that has the letters A or E in them. Shoutouts to Seer. This isn't even getting into the Pokemon PvP meta. Like, these games are kind of bizarre as a property with a fandom built around them. There is so much mechanical depth to these games that you can see these challenge runs or PvP bouts and the fiction starts to bleed away, just lost to the sheer number hell of it all. And then we move on. That's kind of the game industry nowadays. You know, games have never been more communal. Even highly authored single-player experiences are constantly streamed, live blogged, fan art is made and distributed like wildfire, and then the game is done. You know, some new product is out, and the dominant fixation of the internet has latched onto it. Some games kind of sidestep this by being live model games that are already wildly popular or have a pretty robust subcultural niche, but big AAA titles, they're usually released, eaten, and left behind. I already feel bad about that. Like, I have a notoriously bad habit of replaying old games. I kind of obsess a lot about art. Can you imagine? I was just introduced to Underscores like a few weeks ago, and I've been listening to like 3 of her albums almost on repeat. That's just my brain. I feel like a freak. Also, listen to Underscores. But I bring this up in the context of Pokemon specifically because Pokemon Gold was this massive, formative part of my youth. It would be 3 years between that and Ruby and Sapphire's release, and my GBC roster was pretty slim pickings. It was Yellow, Gold, the trading card game, and Oracle of Ages and Seasons, all of which are excellent games, but I just didn't have a lot else to do, and in that context, you know, no wonder Gold felt as good as it did, right? It's huge in its own way. You travel back through the world of the last game, there's 16 gyms, 2 new Pokemon types, a friendship mechanic, my favorite Pokemon gets an adorable baby form, you know, there's incidental coded sexism in it. Like, the game felt like the kind of thing that you can just dig around in forever. Emergent little secrets and puzzles and side quests could be discovered, and they usually led to more Pokemon. I love Pokemon. It's this heart of the games that's missing in modern Pokemon, right? Like, we can bicker about technical issues, about Dexit, about which of the Scarlet Violet professors are the hottest, but, like, we're all kind of clawing at something far less distinct. As good as it would feel to have a clear villain in the story, there just isn't one. These games can't make you feel like a kid again on some level, fine, but more importantly, these games are being made in a world where there's just no time for anything to have that kind of permanence, or if you stubbornly cling to it, it becomes increasingly more solitary to do so. You can, kind of, go back, but the world is constantly moving on. This is a company that's only had 1 year on record where no Pokemon games were released since its inception, and that was 1997. And I don't know. Is this the fate of the series? That Legends Arceus, a game that was broadly praised for its creative innovation, blending some popular kinds of games into something that evokes the childhood suspense of a truly hostile Pokemon world, destined to be rolled up into the annals of history after its customary few weeks in the spotlight? The answer is a soft no. You know, niche interests, fandoms, little communities will always keep a torch alive for Pokemon, right? Like, even titles that received a ton of blowback like BDSP or Scarlet and Violet are still going to show up in GDQ marathons and the like. You know, people are still playing PvP in the newest generation. It's almost comforting that any given major release will find some audience, right? A closing thought. Every time I make one of these videos, it feels momentous, you know, wonderful. I get genuinely excited at the project coming together. I speculate on how it would feel if this current vid ends up being the one that takes off. You know, I reflect on the new things I pushed myself to learn to do, and then when it's out, it lives as this new, impressive thing for a moment, and then I have to move on and make more. No matter how important each video feels to me, I have to let them all go. All exist as this constantly growing collection of past works. I guess I can understand where my heart is when I look at these games as well. If nostalgia is a reflection on the things we couldn't keep from our childhood years, what is it about an industry that seemingly seeks to generate nostalgia, not just nostalgic reminders, but a movement to manufacture nostalgia? In a lot of ways, Legends Arceus is manufactured nostalgia, evoking the ideas, music, style of an old DS Pokemon game in a way that feels sentimental and old, and yet polished and exciting. It rides this kind of emotionally complex line, and it does it well, and yet I can only fixate on what my future with the series is going to be like now. I enjoy these games to a certain extent, but as features get sunsetted, as time moves on, my best memories of these games slowly begin to solely exist as just that, memory. Pokemon doesn't sit right with me as a collector title because the games have been getting more and more obsessed with limited exclusivity, artificial Pokemon scarcity. The series needs to push modern video game sensibilities ever since it was grandfathered into being a flagship for Nintendo. You know, the most lucrative franchise in the world exists by constantly locking out and denying you the chance to fulfill its halcyon tagline. The transience of these games gets all the more present the more this happens. There are no new mystery gifts for Let's Go or BDSP or Legends Arceus because we can only care about what is new and current. You know, I bought the Scarlet and Violet DLC pass, and it's been sitting there waiting for me to get to it. And I kind of suspect that I won't until it becomes old news. I don't want to just consume these games and move on. When I was young, I didn't even really think much on catching all the Pokemon or even doing all the things. I just liked exploring the game, learning about the little tiny character arcs with my rival, you know, going up the Tin Tower. The game felt genuinely mysterious to me. Johto and even Kanto, to some extent, felt huge. A world to explore. And as I've gotten older, I've grown so concerned with things like balanced teams, collecting and trying new Pokemon. I spend a weird amount of time trying to make sense of what to do about post-game Pokemon. Like, would I really want to change up the team that brought me absolute victory just for novelty? But if I don't, then when am I ever going to play with them? You know, my adult life has brought with it doubts, uncertainties, bizarre thinking patterns on inconsequential things like video games, on top of pressing, exhausting concerns like work and family obligations, the feeling that I'm constantly trying to fight my own life's entropy, and now what? I'm supposed to just blitz through this game, you know, get all the plates, fight Volo, finish up my decks ASAP, and get Arceus, and then what? I win? On to the next one? Goodbye forever? Set it adrift along with all the other games you've completed? Endless trash to be consumed and discarded in favor of the new thing? The games are so designed for illusory, ephemeral immediacy that even trying to replay them feels like you're digging through the bones of something, discarded and repurposed to be a compelling vessel for a challenge run, sure, but I guess ultimately what we're losing in the process is the feeling that we can meaningfully be close to these games. Pokemon has lived and died on sentimentality, as a lot of fiction for kids does, but the design philosophy, the deeper we go into the series, the more modern it becomes, has grown impersonal. Your affection is limited to your childhood memories and some curated characters along a sincere but low-stakes journey, while the mechanical act of catching, evolving, trading, and training Pokemon becomes more and more of a task to accomplish. These games, all of them, have real moments to shine, to really capture the whimsical nostalgia of the series, but they are fighting tooth and nail for these moments before they too get swept into obsolescence. Thank you for watching. Just letting you all know, I am very sick while I'm recording this. I'm sure that it just hasn't, no one's noticed, right? Right? Of course not. It's what I love from you all. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Athens Stripes, Bees Louise, Blair Renix, Blueberries in My Coffee, Cole Brayfield, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Gail Simmons, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lapin, Narai the Redmarked, Professor Bopper, St. Rawberry, Thomas Vulpez, Trade Good, Valerian Wraithwall, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.